My mother abandoned me, her only child, to embark on a 2-week ballet excursion with her new husband. In the aftermath, I discovered a stack of 12 hidden letters, and in doing so, chose an entirely new family before her plane had even cleared customs. My name is Aloan, and I was just 15 years old when my mother left me stranded at the airport. I can still vividly recall the indifferent, almost careless shrug she gave as she pressed $200 into my hand and walked away with her new husband and his children. That single moment at Gate 24 completely shattered everything I thought I understood about the concepts of family and love. What I could never have anticipated was how that excruciating betrayal would ultimately guide me to the hidden truth about my own background, irrevocably changing the entire course of my life. Before I explain how I went from being deserted at Gate 24 to finding my true family, trust me when I say you will want to hear precisely what transpired when my mother returned to find my bedroom utterly and completely vacant. My earliest childhood memories of my mother were, for the most part, quite cheerful. I have fond recollections of weekend excursions to our local park, where she would push me on the swings until my stomach danced with exhilaration. For my 6th birthday, she baked a wonderfully lopsided chocolate cake and adorned our small apartment with streamers she made herself from colored paper. We did not have much in terms of material wealth, but we had each other. And back then, that felt like more than enough. Everything took a dramatic turn when I was 8 years old. Arriving home from school one afternoon, I found my parents seated stiffly at opposite ends of our well-worn couch. The air in the room felt thick and heavy with unspoken anxiety as they announced they were getting a divorce. The explanation they offered was painfully brief, a simple statement that sometimes adults just stop loving each other, which left me with far more questions than answers. I remember crying myself to sleep that night, clutching my stuffed rabbit as the muted sounds of their arguments seeped through my bedroom wall. My mother was awarded primary custody, and almost immediately, my father began to fade from my life. Weekend visits with him dwindled from every other weekend to once a month, which then devolved into sporadic phone conversations that grew increasingly awkward and brief. By the time I turned 10, my dad was little more than a name on my birth certificate and a hazy, distant memory. Life as a single-parent household was not easy. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, waitressing by day and cleaning office buildings by night. I became accustomed to the routine of microwave dinners and letting myself into our apartment with the key I wore on a string around my neck. Despite our financial struggles, our life had a certain stability. I understood the rules, knew what was expected of me, and felt secure in my importance to my mother. When I turned 13, everything shifted once again. My mother met Cashin at the restaurant where she worked. He was a wealthy businessman who consistently left generous tips and always requested her section whenever he dined there. I remember the very first time she spoke of him, her cheeks flushing with a youthful excitement as she described his expensive suit, and the way he looked at her as if she were someone truly special. Their romance progressed at a dizzying pace. Within 6 months, Cashin had proposed to my mother with a diamond ring so large that it seemed comically out of place on her work-worn hand. Before I could fully process the idea of having a stepfather, we were moving into his sprawling suburban mansion, a place complete with a swimming pool, a home theater, and more bathrooms than I could possibly count. Cashin's 3 children from his previous marriage also resided in the house. Aurelia was 14, only a year older than me, and her perpetually disdainful expression made me feel instantly inadequate. Ronan, who was 12, was quiet and distant, barely acknowledging my existence. Lyra, the youngest at 10, was initially the most welcoming, but her friendliness quickly evaporated once we were all living under the same roof. From the very beginning, it was painfully clear that I did not belong in this pre-existing family unit. Cashin was polite but remote, reserving his genuine smiles and affection for his own children. Family dinners were dominated by conversations about private schools, country club memberships, and vacation homes, topics that were entirely foreign to me. When I tried to contribute, my comments about school or books were met with polite, dismissive nods before the conversation inevitably shifted back to the step-siblings' accomplishments in tennis, the debate club, or piano recitals. What stung the most, however, was witnessing the transformation in my mother. The woman who had once diligently clipped coupons and shopped at clearance racks was now speaking knowledgeably about designer brands and exclusive restaurants. She had her hair professionally colored, her teeth whitened, and began referring to our old life as the struggle years, with an embarrassed laugh whenever Cashin's friends were present. It felt as though she was shedding her old self, and with it, the parts of her that were intrinsically connected to me. I made a concerted effort to blend in with my new step-siblings. I offered to help Aurelia with her math homework, complimented Lyra on her artwork, and asked Ronan about his video games. My attempts were met with chilly politeness at best and outright rejection at worst. One particularly painful memory involves overhearing Aurelia on the phone with her friends, remarking that her father's new wife came with baggage, a clear reference to me. As summer approached, Cashin announced a grand family vacation to Bali. It was to be 2 weeks at a luxurious resort with private villas and personal butlers. Despite the widening chasm between my mother and me, a spark of hope ignited within me. Perhaps this trip, away from the pressures of school and daily routines, would be the opportunity I needed to finally bond with my new family. My hopes were swiftly crushed when my mother took the stepchildren on a shopping spree for new vacation clothes, pointedly excluding me. When I asked her why, she casually remarked that I already had plenty of clothes, even though most of my wardrobe was from our pre-Cashin life. I decided to use the money I had saved from babysitting to buy myself a new swimsuit, a modest blue one-piece that paled in comparison to the designer bikinis Aurelia and Lyra would be packing. A week before the trip, I overheard a deeply unsettling conversation between my mother and Cashin. They were in their bedroom with the door slightly ajar, unaware that I was passing by on my way to the kitchen. "What about the arrangements for a loan?" Cashin asked, his voice low and serious. "It is all taken care of," my mother replied dismissively, a knot forming in my stomach. "She will not be a problem." When I confronted her about it later, she brushed off my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Just trip details, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." The morning of our departure was a whirlwind of chaos and excitement. The house buzzed with activity as suitcases were loaded into Cashin's luxury SUV. I noticed that my passport was not among the stack of travel documents on the kitchen counter. When I pointed this out to my mother, she mumbled something about having it in her purse and hurried me along. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. My mother's persistent avoidance of eye contact during the drive to the airport, the fact that no one discussed my seat assignment while they debated who would get the window seats, and the curious detail that my suitcase was significantly smaller than everyone else's. But at 15, desperate to feel like I belonged to this family, I willfully ignored the red flags. The international terminal was a frantic symphony of hurried passengers, rolling luggage, and busy airline staff. Cashin navigated our group through the crowd with practiced efficiency, my mother at his side, clutching her designer handbag. Aurelia, Ronan, and Lyra followed closely, their faces alight with anticipation. I trailed behind, struggling to keep up while pulling my small suitcase. When we reached the check-in counter, Cashin presented the airline agent with our passports and confirmation details. I watched as he handed over 5 passports, not 6. A cold dread began to creep up my spine as I saw each family member receive their boarding pass, except for me. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "I think you forgot my boarding pass." The airline agent looked confused. "I only have 5 passengers listed for this reservation, miss." Cashin cleared his throat. "Your mother needs to speak with you about that. We will go on ahead to security." As the stepchildren and Cashin disappeared with the luggage cart, my mother took my elbow and steered me toward a quiet corner near a gift shop. Her face wore an expression I had never seen before, a strange mixture of detachment and mild annoyance. "Listen, Aloan," she began, her tone unnervingly calm. "There has been a change of plans. You are not coming with us to Bali." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "What? Why? Did I do something wrong?" She let out an exasperated sigh and glanced over toward Cashin and the children waiting at the security line. "Cashin feels this should be a trip for just us and his kids, a chance for us to really bond as a family. But I am family too," I cried out, my voice trembling. "I am your daughter." "Do not make a scene," she hissed, digging inside her purse. She pulled out a wad of cash and thrust it into my hand. "Here is $200. You can figure it out, just take an Uber home." I stared at the money in disbelief. "You are leaving me at the airport alone. I do not even have a house key." She gave that careless shrug that would haunt my dreams for years. "Mrs. Voss next door has the spare. You will be fine. You are mature for your age." Tears welled in my eyes as the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. "Mom, please, you cannot do this." "Cashin is waiting," she said, looking nervously toward the security checkpoint. "This vacation is important for our future, Aloan. Sometimes we all have to make sacrifices." "A sacrifice would be giving up a concert ticket or postponing a shopping trip," I retorted, my shock giving way to a surge of anger. "This is abandonment." She flinched at the word but quickly composed herself. "Do not be so dramatic. It is just 2 weeks. The refrigerator is stocked and I left money for pizza in the kitchen drawer." She leaned in, giving me a quick, dry kiss on the forehead. "I will call you when we land." With that, she turned and walked away, her high heels clicking on the polished airport floor as she rejoined Cashin and the stepchildren. I watched in stunned silence as they passed through security, my mother never once looking back. Aurelia, however, caught my eye for a fleeting moment and offered a triumphant smirk before they vanished from view. I stood there, motionless, the $200 crumpled in my trembling fist. All around me, the normal rhythm of the airport continued, travelers rushing to their gates, families sharing tearful goodbyes, and airline announcements echoing overhead. But for me, time seemed to stand still as the enormity of my mother's betrayal settled in. As I sank onto a nearby bench, hot tears began to stream uncontrollably down my face. Several passers-by cast curious or sympathetic glances my way, but no one stopped. In an airport, a crying teenager was just another piece of the scenery, easily observed and just as easily forgotten. I spent the next hour in a daze, staring at the departure board as their flight status changed from boarding to departed. Each update was another twist of the knife. I tried calling my mother's cell phone multiple times, but each call went straight to voicemail. My text messages were marked as delivered, but remained unread. "Having fun at the airport," I finally texted, fury momentarily eclipsing the pain. "Hope abandoning your child was worth the first-class upgrade." No reply came. Not that I really expected one. By now, my mother would be settling into her seat, probably sipping champagne next to Cashin, relieved to be free of the baggage from her previous life, including me. As the afternoon bled into the evening, the precarity of my situation grew more acute. An airport security officer approached me as I sat in the food court, nursing a soda I had bought just to have an excuse to occupy a table. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked, his expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. "You have been here for several hours now." "I am waiting for my ride," I lied, avoiding his gaze. "They got stuck in traffic." He looked skeptical but nodded and moved on, reminding me not to leave my luggage unattended. Another wave of shame washed over me. How could I possibly admit that my own mother had just left me here? The words were stuck in my throat, held back by a toxic cocktail of humiliation and a lingering, misplaced loyalty. As the evening crowds thinned and the airport shops began to pull down their security gates, the reality of my predicament became impossible to ignore. The $200 would not last long. Even if I managed to get back to the house, I would be alone for 2 weeks with no transportation and minimal cash. I found myself in an airport restroom, splashing cold water on my puffy face, trying to formulate some kind of plan. The girl staring back at me from the mirror seemed like a stranger, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. In that moment, I understood that something fundamental had shifted. The invisible tether that had always connected me to my mother, the core belief that she would always protect me, had been severed for good. It had been 6 hours since my mother had walked away. I had migrated from bench to bench across the terminal, a silent observer of families and couples embarking on journeys together. Each passing hour amplified my sense of isolation. My phone battery was critically low, adding a layer of technological panic to my already fraught situation. Around 8 o'clock, I found my way to an airport diner that was still open. I took a seat at the counter and ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a side of fries, determined to stretch my limited funds. The waitress, a kind-faced woman with a name tag that read Sarah, brought my food and then lingered, studying my face. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You look like you have been crying." I attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I am fine, just a long day." She did not press the issue, but a few minutes later, she returned with a chocolate milkshake I had not ordered. "On the house," she said with a wink. "Whatever is going on, sugar and chocolate never hurt." Her simple act of kindness nearly broke me. I thanked her through the lump in my throat and ate slowly, scrolling through the contacts on my phone, desperately searching for someone who could help. The list of options was heartbreakingly short. Most of my friends from before the move had drifted away, and I had not made many new ones in Cashin's affluent neighborhood. I tried texting a couple of my mother's old friends, women who had been a part of our life before Cashin. One did not reply, and the other sent a brief message saying she was out of town. It seemed my mother's old support system had been discarded along with our small apartment and budget groceries when she moved on to her new life. As I scanned through my contacts, one name leaped out, causing my heart to skip a beat. Dad. I had not spoken to him in over 3 years. Our last conversation had been a brief, stilted phone call on my 12th birthday. After that, he had seemingly vanished. My mother had always implied that he did not want to be a part of my life, that he had a new family and new priorities. "Your father has moved on," she would say whenever I asked about him. "Some men just are not cut out for fatherhood." I stared at his contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. What if he rejected me too? What if my mother had been telling the truth, and he really did not want anything to do with me? The thought of facing another abandonment was excruciating. I retreated to the airport restroom again, locking myself in a stall for privacy. I rehearsed what I would say, trying out different openings. "Hi, Dad." "It is Aloan. I know it has been a while." No, too casual. "Hello, this is Aloan. I am sorry to bother you, but I am in trouble." Better, but still not quite right. In the end, desperation won out over pride. With a trembling hand, I pressed the call button and held my breath as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I was just about to hang up when a deep voice answered. "Hello." The sound of his voice, so familiar yet so foreign, momentarily robbed me of speech. "Hello, is anyone there?" He repeated, "Dad." I finally managed, my voice small and shaky. There was a pause and then, "Aloan, is that really you, sweetheart?" The note of concern in his voice struck a chord deep within me. "Dad, I need your help," I pleaded. And then the entire story came tumbling out in a torrent of words, punctuated by sobs, the remarriage, the move, the airport, the $200. By the end, I was barely coherent. "She left you alone at the airport." His tone had shifted, a steely edge replacing the initial disbelief. "Where are you now? Which airport?" I told him, half expecting him to offer to call social services or wire me money for a hotel room. "Stay exactly where you are," he said, his voice firm. "I am coming to get you myself. It will take me about 3 hours to get there. Can you stay safe until then? You are coming here." I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You do not have to do that. Maybe you could just help me get home." "Aloan," he interjected, "I am coming to get you. Find the customer service desk for the airline your mother was flying. Tell them your situation. I am going to call ahead and make sure they take care of you until I arrive." After he hung up, I sat in the bathroom stall for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My father, the man I believed had no interest in me, was dropping everything to come to my rescue. It seemed too good to be true, and the disappointments of my life had taught me to be wary of hope. Nevertheless, I followed his instructions and made my way to the customer service desk, my heart pounding in my chest. To my surprise, the airline staff were immediately sympathetic. They escorted me to a private waiting lounge, brought me a sandwich and a juice, and assured me they would look after me until my father arrived. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you would think," the customer service manager said kindly. "Parents changing plans at the last minute, leaving kids to fend for themselves." The 3-hour wait felt both impossibly long and strangely surreal. I oscillated between hope, anxiety, and sheer exhaustion. What if my father did not show up? What if he did, but he resented having to rescue me? What if this was all just a setup for yet another rejection? My mind drifted back to the few memories I had of him from before the divorce. Teaching me to ride my bike in the park, his steady hand on the back of the seat as I wobbled forward. Reading me bedtime stories, using a different voice for each character. The Christmas morning, he built me a dollhouse from a kit, his face beaming with pride. If he had loved me then, why had he disappeared from my life? Why had he not fought harder to see me? The questions swirled in my exhausted brain as the minutes ticked by. Just as I was starting to drift off in the uncomfortable airport chair, a voice came over the PA system. "Attention, please. Will Aloan Williams please come to the information desk?" "Aloan Williams to the information desk, please." My heart leaped into my throat. I gathered my small suitcase and followed an airline employee who had come to escort me. Instead of leading me back to the main terminal, she guided me through a series of corridors and security doors until we reached what looked like a VIP terminal area. "Your father has arranged to meet you here," the employee explained as we approached a set of glass doors leading out onto the tarmac. That is when I saw it. A sleek private jet with a staircase extending down from its open door. And descending those steps was a tall man in a business suit. His face, so familiar, made my breath catch in my throat. My father looked different than I remembered. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence I did not recognize from my childhood. But as his eyes met mine across the tarmac, I saw that they were exactly as I remembered, kind and crinkled at the corners. For a moment, we both just stood there, taking each other in across the distance. Then he strode forward, closing the space between us in a matter of seconds. He stopped just short of pulling me into a hug, a flicker of hesitation on his face. "Aloan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I cannot believe it is really you." I did not know what to say, what to do. A part of me wanted to collapse into his arms like the little girl who used to greet him at the door. Another part, the wounded teenager who felt abandoned by both parents, held back. He seemed to sense my conflict. "I am so sorry," he said softly, "for everything, for not being there, for not fighting harder to stay in your life." Something in his raw sincerity broke through my defenses. The tears I thought I had exhausted hours ago returned with a renewed force. "She said you did not want to see me anymore," I choked out. "That you had moved on." His face darkened. "That was never true, not for a single day." He tentatively opened his arms, and this time I did not hesitate. I stepped into his embrace and let out years of pent-up grief and confusion onto his shoulder. We stood there for what felt like a long time, both of us overwhelmed with emotion. When we finally pulled apart, he kept one arm draped around my shoulders and guided me toward the waiting jet. "Let us get you out of here," he said gently. "We can talk properly once we are in the air." The interior of the private jet was unlike anything I had ever imagined. Plush leather seats, polished wood tables, and soft, ambient lighting created an atmosphere of serene luxury. A flight attendant greeted us warmly and offered me a selection of drinks and snacks. As we took our seats facing each other, I could not help but stare at my father in awe. "Is this your plane?" He smiled, a hint of awkwardness in his expression. "The company's technically. I am the CEO of Horizon Tech now." "CEO?" I repeated, stunned. My mother had always portrayed him as struggling financially, barely able to make his child support payments. "It has been a good few years," he said simply, before leaning forward, his expression turning serious. "Aloan, there is something you need to know. I have been trying to reach you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, phone calls, all of it. When your mother remarried and moved, I lost track of you completely. I hired private investigators who could not find your new address. I filed motions with the court that were somehow lost or delayed." My mind reeled. as the implications of his words sank in. "She kept you away from me on purpose." He nodded, a look of deep pain in his eyes. "I have been sending child support and additional funds every single month since the divorce, money that I am guessing you never saw." I thought of the second-hand clothes, the times we ate ramen noodles for days on end, my mother's constant complaints about money. "We were always broke," I whispered. "She said you barely paid anything." My father opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, handing it to me. Inside were copies of canceled checks, court documents, and records of attempted contact, all meticulously organized by date. The evidence of his efforts and my mother's deception was overwhelming. "I am not showing you this to hurt you," he said gently, "but you deserve to know the truth." As the jet lifted off, carrying me away from the airport where my mother had abandoned me, I felt a strange sense of weightlessness, as if I were shedding years of misunderstanding and manipulation with every mile we climbed. My father explained that he now lived in Seattle, running the tech company he had co-founded shortly after the divorce. What had started as a small venture had grown into a major player in the industry, bringing him a level of success he had never anticipated. "I kept your room ready," he admitted, a touch of embarrassment in his voice. "All these years, just in case." The flight passed in a blur as we began the delicate process of reacquainting ourselves. There were awkward silences and moments of intense emotion, but underneath it all, there was a current of genuine connection that felt both brand new and ancient. When we landed, a car was waiting to take us to his house. I pressed my face against the window as we drove through affluent neighborhoods before turning onto a private drive that wound up a hillside. The house that came into view was breathtaking, a modern structure of glass and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. "Home sweet home," my father said, watching my reaction with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "I hope you will be comfortable here." A woman named Myra met us at the door. I tensed, wondering if this was my father's wife, but he quickly introduced her as his executive assistant, who had helped coordinate my arrival. "I have prepared the blue bedroom for Aloan," she informed my father. "Fresh towels in the ensuite, and I have stocked the kitchen with groceries." The security team has been updated to include her in the household. My father thanked her, and she left with a kind smile in my direction. He then led me on a tour of the house, each room more stunning than the last. When we reached my bedroom, I stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the thoughtful details. The room was painted a soft blue and had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. A plush queen-sized bed dominated one wall, while a desk, a bookshelf, and a cozy reading chair created a perfect study nook by the window. But it was the collection of items arranged on the dresser that caught my eye. "Are those—" I moved closer, unable to finish the question. My father nodded, his expression tender. "Birthday and Christmas presents. Every year since I lost contact. I could not send them, but I could not stand not to buy them either." Arranged chronologically were gifts for every age I had been. They were still in their original wrapping paper. Beside them was a photo album with a simple label. "Aloan." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were the few photos my father had managed to collect of me growing up. School pictures my mother must have sent in the early years after the divorce, a newspaper clipping of me winning an academic award in 6th grade, a blurry, long-distance shot of me leaving my old school. "You really did try to stay in my life," I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "Every single day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I am not going anywhere now if you will let me be your dad again." That first night in my new home, we ordered takeout from a local restaurant, as neither of us felt up to cooking. The conversation flowed more easily, our guards lowered by exhaustion and replenished by food. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and heard. My opinions mattered, my feelings were acknowledged. As I finally slipped into the unbelievably comfortable bed in my new room, I was overcome with a profound sense of mental and physical exhaustion. My last conscious thought before drifting off to sleep was that maybe, just maybe, being abandoned at the airport was not the end I had feared, but the beginning I had always desperately needed. I woke the next morning feeling slightly disoriented. The unfamiliar comfort of the bed and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below were perplexing. Then, the events of the previous day rushed back, and I sat up, taking in my new surroundings in the bright morning light. The room was even more beautiful than it had been the night before. Sunlight streamed through the expansive windows, casting patterns on the pale blue rug. I ran my fingers over the plush duvet, marveling at the stark contrast between this luxury and the life I had known. After showering in the ensuite bathroom, which featured a rainfall showerhead and more toiletries than I had ever owned at one time, I changed back into yesterday's clothes and went downstairs. I found my father in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with limited success. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a sheepish grin and gesturing to a misshapen blob in the pan. "I thought I would make breakfast, but it seems my cooking skills have not improved since you were little." The memory surfaced unexpectedly. Sunday mornings when he would try to make pancakes while my mother slept in. They were often strangely shaped and occasionally burnt, but my father served them with such pride that I never complained. "I remember your pancakes," I said, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen island. "You used to make smiley faces with chocolate chips." His face lit up. "You remember that? You were so young." "Some things you just remember," I replied, accepting the plate he offered. Despite their appearance, the pancakes tasted wonderful, and the simple act of sharing a meal helped to ease the remaining awkwardness between us. After we ate, my father gave me a more thorough tour of the house and the grounds. The property was expansive, with manicured gardens that sloped down to a private beach access point. Inside, the house boasted a home gym, a movie theater, and an office with a view that would make it difficult for most people to concentrate. "I have a couple of people I would like you to meet today," he explained as we settled in the main living area. "If you feel up to it." An hour later, I was sitting across from a poised, intelligent woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Rowena Pike, a family law attorney. "What your mother did constitutes child abandonment under the law," she stated, her tone professional yet compassionate. "Leaving a minor without proper arrangements for their care is illegal. Furthermore, there appears to be significant financial misconduct regarding the child support payments your father has been making." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "I do not want to get my mom in trouble. You just want to be safe and cared for," Rowena finished for me. "I understand, but we need to establish legal protections for you, especially if you wish to remain here with your father." My father, who had been listening silently, leaned forward. "Aloan, the decision is ultimately yours, but I want you to know that I am prepared to fight for full custody if that is what you want." The thought was both terrifying and liberating. "Can I really choose?" "You are 15, Rowena affirmed. "The court gives significant weight to the preference of a child your age, particularly in cases involving abandonment or neglect." After the attorney left, my father took me to his office, where he had methodically documented every attempt he had made to contact me. There were printouts of court filings requesting visitation, logs of unanswered calls to my mother, and even records of emails to my school that had apparently never reached me. "She threatened legal action if I tried to contact you directly," he explained, showing me a letter from my mother's lawyer dated 3 years prior. "She claimed I was harassing her and causing you emotional distress." Each new piece of evidence added another layer to the puzzle, painting a picture of deliberate alienation that made my heart ache. "Why would she do this? Just to keep you away from me?" my father sighed. "I think it was more complicated than that. After the divorce, your mother struggled financially, and that was partly my fault. My career had not taken off yet. I think when the company succeeded, and my financial situation improved so dramatically, it was easier for her to maintain the narrative that I was a deadbeat dad than to explain why she had kept us apart." My mother called 2 days after my arrival, just as I was starting to settle into a new rhythm with my father. I stared at her name on my phone's screen, a storm of conflicting emotions momentarily paralyzing me. "You do not have to answer," my father said gently, noticing my distress. The phone went to voicemail after 4 rings. A minute later, a notification popped up, indicating she had left a message. With trembling fingers, I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. "Aloin, honey, there seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding." My mother's voice was deceptively bright. "I thought you understood the plan was for you to stay home during our trip. Cashin thought it would be a good opportunity for you to have some independence, and I agreed. I did not abandon you, sweetie. That is such a harsh word. Call me back so we can clear this up. The resort Wi-Fi is spotty, but I will try to check my messages. Love you." The blatant rewriting of reality made my stomach churn. There had been no plan for me to stay home, no discussion of independence. She had abandoned me without warning and was now trying to gaslight me into doubting my own experience. "Classic," my father muttered, shaking his head. "She has not changed a bit." I chose not to return her call. Instead, with the support of Rowena Pike and my father, I made the decision to stay in Seattle permanently. The attorney began the process of filing for a change of custody, compiling the evidence of my mother's abandonment and financial malfeasance. With the immediate legal issues underway, my father turned his attention to more practical matters. "You need clothes, school supplies, any personal items you want," he told me. "We can go shopping today if you are up for it." The shopping trip was a surreal experience. Accustomed to thrift stores and clearance racks, I was overwhelmed by my father's insistence that I pick out anything I wanted without looking at the price tags. By the end of the day, I had a new wardrobe, a laptop for school, and a new phone with an unlimited data plan. A stark contrast to the restrictive plan my mother had grudgingly provided. That evening, sitting on the terrace overlooking the ocean, my father and I had our first truly deep conversation about the divorce and the lost years. "Why did you and Mom split up?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had plagued me since I was 8. He was quiet for a long time, choosing his words carefully. "The simplest answer is that we wanted different things from life. Your mother valued financial security and social status above all else. When my first business venture failed, she saw me as a failure, not as a partner going through a temporary setback." "And you?" I prompted. "I wanted a real partnership, someone who would ride out the storms with me, not abandon ship at the first sign of rough water." He looked at me, his expression full of regret. "I never wanted to leave you, Aloin. That was the hardest part. Your mother used her custody rights as a weapon, slowly restricting my access until I was effectively cut out of your life. As the days unfolded, we began to talk about my future. My father contacted a prestigious private school in Seattle and arranged for me to start classes in the fall semester. A child psychologist was engaged to help me process the trauma of the abandonment and the years of manipulation. Slowly, tentatively, I started to imagine a future where I was not just tolerated, but cherished and supported. 1 week after my arrival in Seattle, my father and Rowena Pike suggested that we retrieve my belongings from my mother's house. With her still in Bali for another week, it was the perfect opportunity to legally enter the property, as I was still technically a resident, and remove my personal effects without a confrontation. "You do not have to go if it is too difficult," my father told me. "I can handle it with the legal team." But I knew instinctively that this was something I needed to do for myself, a necessary step in closing this chapter of my life. "I want to go," I said firmly. "There are things there that are important to me." Having made the decision, we planned the trip with meticulous care. Flights were booked, legal documents were prepared, and a moving company was hired to transport my belongings. As the day approached, I found myself writing and rewriting a letter to leave for my mother, trying to articulate the depth of her betrayal and my resolve to start a new life. 3 days before my mother was due back from Bali, my father and I arrived at the house I had shared with her and Cashin's family, accompanied by Rowena Pike and her paralegal. Using my key, I opened the front door to a house that was just as we had left it, eerily silent and still. Walking into that space felt disorienting, like being a tourist in my own life. Familiar objects suddenly seemed alien, as if I were seeing them through a new lens. For the first time, I noticed that the photos on the walls were predominantly of Cashin and his children, with my mother making an occasional appearance. There were almost no photos of me, and none of me with my mother. "Where is your room?" my father asked softly, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. I led him upstairs to the smallest bedroom at the very end of the hall, the one furthest from the master suite. Opening the door revealed my small space, tidy but impersonal, lacking the lavish touches evident in the step-siblings' rooms we had passed. "This was your room?" my father asked, his voice laced with disbelief as he took in the basic furniture and lack of personal decor. "It is fine," I said automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of being told to be grateful for what I had. His expression softened. "No, sweetheart, it is not fine. You deserved so much better." With the help of the movers, we began the process of packing up my things. Clothes were placed in wardrobe boxes, books and school supplies in smaller cartons. I was selective in what I took, leaving behind anything that had been a gift from my mother or Cashin, choosing only what was truly mine or held sentimental value. As I cleared out my desk drawers, I found a small box of treasures I had almost forgotten, tucked away in the very back of the bottom drawer. Inside were photos from before the divorce, a few birthday cards my father had managed to get to me in the early years after they separated, and a small teddy bear he had given me for my 5th birthday. "You kept these," he said, his voice thick with emotion as I showed him the keepsakes. "I never fully believed her," I admitted, "not deep down about you not caring." Then, in my closet under a shoe rack, I found something that made my blood run cold, a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band, all addressed to me in my father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the first one. It was a birthday card for my 13th birthday, filled with a heartfelt message and containing a gift card that had never been used. One by one, I went through the envelopes, each one containing more evidence of my father's relentless efforts to stay in my life, efforts my mother had deliberately concealed from me. Cards for every birthday and Christmas, a letter with his new address and phone number after he moved to Seattle, photos of him at his company headquarters, with a note saying how much he wished I could visit someday. "She kept all of these from me," I said quietly, tears streaming down my face. "All this time I thought you had forgotten me." My father pulled me into a fierce hug. "Never, not for a single day." While the movers continued their work, I found myself drawn to my mother's home office, compelled by a need to understand why she had gone to such lengths to isolate me from my father. Rowena had advised me that personal documents pertaining to me were legally mine to take, so I began to go through the filing cabinet. In a folder labeled "Divorce," I found financial records that confirmed everything my father had told me. Monthly child support payments, far exceeding the amount my mother had claimed to receive, had been regularly deposited into an account I never knew existed. There were also court documents showing my father's repeated petitions for visitation, all of which my mother had contested with a variety of flimsy excuses. The most damning discovery of all was a draft of a letter to her attorney, dated around the time she met Cashin, outlining a strategy to minimize my father's influence as she integrated into her new partner's life. In it, I was referred to as a complication that needed to be carefully managed to secure Cashin's continued interest. By late afternoon, the packing was complete. As the movers loaded the last of the boxes onto their truck, I sat at my now bare desk and wrote the letter I had been composing in my head for days. "Dear Mom," it began. The formality of mother felt too cold, the warmth of mommy impossibly out of reach. I poured out my feelings of betrayal, not just from the airport abandonment, but from the years of being made to feel like an inconvenience. I told her I had found the hidden letters and the financial records, that I knew the truth about her systematic campaign to keep my father away from me. "I am choosing to live with Dad now," I wrote near the end. "Not out of revenge, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am wanted and cherished. I hope someday you understand the damage your choices have caused, not just to me, but to yourself. Despite everything, I do not hate you, but I have to love myself enough to walk away." I placed the letter on the stripped mattress of what used to be my bed, the single sheet of white paper a stark contrast against the bare blue fabric. As a final gesture, I left the house key beside it, a symbol of my permanent departure from this family. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt a strange and potent mixture of grief, relief, and resolve. My father was waiting by the car, his expression anxious. "All done?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He seemed to understand, opening the car door for me without any further questions. As we drove away, I did not look back at the house. I looked forward toward the future I was now free to build for myself. My mother returned from Bali 3 days later. Within hours, my phone was deluged with notifications, a barrage of increasingly frantic messages. "Where are you? Why is your room empty? Call me immediately. Aloan, this is not funny. Come home right now. I just spoke to your father's lawyer. How could you do this to me after everything I have done for you? Please come home, sweetie. We can work this out. I miss you." The texts followed a predictable pattern: anger, manipulation, and feigned remorse. I showed them to my father and Rowena, who advised me not to respond until the legal proceedings were further along. A week after her return, my mother showed up unannounced at my father's house, having somehow tracked down the address. The security system alerted us to her presence at the gate, her expensive SUV visible on the monitor as she repeatedly pressed the intercom button. "You do not have to see her," my father told me. "We can have security turn her away." But I knew this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary. "I will talk to her," I said firmly, "but I want you and Rowena here." When the front door opened, my mother's face was a study in conflicting emotions: relief at finding me and fury at the circumstances. She was dressed in a costly sundress, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, the very picture of affluent suburbia. "Aloan, thank God," she cried, moving to embrace me. I took an instinctive step backward and her arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. "What is going on? Why did you leave? Why are you with him?" The last word was spoken with such venom that I flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," my father suggested, his voice calm but firm. Once we were all seated in the living room, with Rowena present as both legal counsel and a neutral witness, my mother's composure began to fray. Her eyes darted around the elegant space, taking in the obvious wealth and taste evident in every detail. "So this is what this is about," she said with a brittle laugh. "He lured you away with the promise of luxury. I should have known." "That is not why I am here," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I am here because you left me at an airport. I am here because you have been lying to me about Dad for years. I am here because I found all the letters and cards you hid from me." Her face faltered, then hardened. "You went through my private things. How dare you?" "They were addressed to me," I countered. "They were mine to read." "You are 15 years old," she snapped. "And anything under my roof, including your mail, is my business. I was protecting you from his inconsistency and his broken promises." My father, who had been observing quietly, finally spoke. "Vivian, there were no broken promises, only your relentless campaign to erase me from our daughter's life. You have no right to judge me," she spat. "You have no idea what it was like, raising her on my own while you were off becoming a millionaire." "I sent child support every month," he stated evenly. "Far more than what the court required. Money you seem to have spent on yourself while telling Aloan you were struggling." My mother's face flushed crimson. "That is a lie. I sacrificed everything for her. Even abandoning her at an airport so you could go on vacation with your new family." Rowena interjected, her professional tone making the accusation all the more damning. For a moment, my mother seemed at a loss for words. Then she narrowed her eyes, her focus returning to me. "I did not abandon you. I gave you an opportunity for independence. If you had just gone home like you were supposed to, none of this drama would have happened." The audacious rewriting of history made my chest tighten with anger. "You left me at an international airport with $200 and no house key. You did not tell me to go home until you were walking away from me. You did not answer my calls or my texts. How is that an opportunity? You are twisting things," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its conviction. My father leaned forward. "Vivian, we have security footage from the airport. We have witness statements from the airline employees. And we have the text messages you sent Aloan after the fact, trying to cover your tracks." The color drained from my mother's face. You are building a case against me. You want to take my daughter and send me to jail after everything we have been through. This is not about punishment, Rowena clarified. This is about determining what is in Aloan's best interest going forward. She has clearly expressed a desire to live with her father, and given the circumstances, the court is highly likely to grant her request. My mother's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to me, her voice pleading. Aloan, please, I made a mistake. I was wrong, but you cannot leave me for him. We are a family. We stopped being a family when you decided Cashin and his children were more important than me, I said quietly. Maybe even before that, when you started lying about Dad. It was not like that, she whispered. Then what was it like? I challenged. Help me understand why you would hide Dad's letters, lie about the child's support, and then abandon me for a vacation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly unable to construct a narrative that even she could believe. Finally, she whispered, Cashin thought it would be best if you stayed home. He said the resort was more for adults and his children who are used to that kind of lifestyle. I was afraid of losing him. The raw honesty was more cutting than any of her previous manipulations. So you chose him over me. I chose security, she corrected. Do you have any idea what it is like to be a single mother with no money? Cashin offered us a better life. He offered you a better life, I retorted. I was just the baggage that came with it. Before she could respond, the front door opened and Cashin strode in, his face a mask of controlled fury. Vivian, this has gone on long enough. Get in the car. Now. My father stood up immediately. How did you get past security? Cashin ignored him, his focus entirely on my mother. I told you not to come here. You are only making things worse. Our lawyer said no contact. My mother seemed to shrink under his gaze, her fleeting moment of honesty evaporating as she reverted to the role of the compliant wife. I just wanted to see Aloan. And now you have, he said dismissively. Let us go. As my mother stood to follow him, I called out after her. Is this really what you want, Mom? Someone who treats you like a child and sees me as an inconvenience. She paused, her face a canvas of conflict, but Cashin took her elbow in a firm grip. The car, Vivian, now! The last I saw of my mother that day was her back as she walked away from me. Just like at the airport, only this time, I was not the one being left behind. In the wake of that confrontation, my father's legal team filed for a restraining order after Cashin attempted to gain access to the property again the following day. The court granted it, and a temporary custody arrangement was put in place, pending a full hearing. The hardest part was coming to terms with the fact that my mother had chosen her new life over me, not just once at the airport, but repeatedly over the years with every hidden letter and every lie she told about my father. The little girl who had once believed she was the center of her mother's world had to face the devastating truth that she had been an afterthought at best. The months following my mother's dramatic appearance were challenging, but also transformative. My weekly sessions with Dr. Cressa Hale, a therapist who specialized in adolescent trauma and parental alienation, provided a safe space to process the complex web of emotions surrounding my mother's betrayal and years of manipulation. The adjustment process involved creating new routines, setting boundaries, and slowly learning to trust that my father's presence in my life was permanent. What you are feeling is entirely normal, Dr. Hale assured me during one particularly difficult session. Anger, grief, relief, guilt, all of these can coexist. Healing is not a linear process. With her guidance, I began to understand that my mother's actions were a reflection of her own brokenness, not a measure of my worth. This realization did not excuse what she had done, but it helped me to carry the burden with less self-blame. "Whole people do not abandon their children," Dr. Hale said. "Your mother's choices speak to her limitations, not yours." My father enrolled me at Westlake Academy, one of Seattle's top private schools, for my sophomore year. The transition was both exciting and daunting. After years of being the outsider in Cashin's home, I was wary of forming new connections. But to my surprise, I began to make genuine friends for the first time in years. Lyra and Evan, twins who shared my love of literature, welcomed me into their circle with an ease that felt almost suspicious at first. Juniper, a talented artist who noticed my tentative sketches, offered to teach me proper techniques during our lunch breaks. I slowly began to let my guard down, allowing these new friends to see glimpses of the real me. "You are different than when you first got here," Lyra observed one afternoon as we walked home from school. "Less guarded." "I guess I am learning that not everyone has an agenda," I replied, surprised by my own insight. Building a relationship with my father was a delicate dance of rediscovery. We were getting to know each other as the people we were now, while also reconciling the memories of who we used to be. Sometimes, the past and present aligned perfectly, like when he remembered my childhood fascination with stargazing and installed a powerful telescope on the deck. Other times, the years of separation created unexpected chasms, moments of disconnect that served as a poignant reminder of all we had lost. "I wish I could have been there for your first day of middle school," he said one evening as we looked through some of the old photos I had brought from my mother's house. "Your science fair projects, your first crush. We cannot get those years back," I told him, surprised to find myself in the role of the comforter. "But we have now and the future." He squeezed my hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. "When did you get so wise?" "Trauma has its perks," I joked, the dark humor a sign of my ongoing healing. 6 months after I moved in with him, the court granted my father full legal custody. My mother, represented by a high-priced lawyer Cashin had hired, initially contested the ruling, but eventually acquiesced after Rowena presented the overwhelming evidence of abandonment and financial malfeasance. The judge ordered my mother to repay the misappropriated child support funds and established a structured visitation schedule that would only begin after I felt ready, with mandatory family counseling as a prerequisite. It was more grace than I felt she deserved, but my father gently reminded me that finding a way to have some form of relationship with her could be beneficial for my own long-term emotional health. "You can be angry with her, even hate what she did, without severing the connection completely," he advised. "But the choice is ultimately yours. I will support whatever you decide." In therapy, my mother's narrative had shifted from denying the abandonment to framing it as a misguided attempt to please Cashin, as if that somehow made it less hurtful. The first few sessions were excruciatingly difficult, with her alternating between tearful apologies and subtle attempts to justify her actions. "I just wanted security for us," she would repeat. "So you made sure I was left alone and insecure at an airport instead," I replied during one particularly tense session. Over time, I established firm boundaries with my mother. I would not return to live with her, no matter the promises or emotional pleas. I would not pretend the past did not happen, and I would not allow her to rewrite our history to assuage her guilt. These were my non-negotiables, and gradually she seemed to accept them. My father remained remarkably neutral throughout this process, never speaking ill of my mother despite all she had done. When I asked him about this restraint, his answer stayed with me. "Hating her only poisons you," he said. "For better or worse, you are half of her. Besides, she gave me you. For that, I can forgive almost anything." My first holiday season with my father and his extended family, grandparents and cousins I barely remembered, was a revelation. The genuine warmth and acceptance I felt stood in stark contrast to the performative family dinners at Cashin's, where I had always felt like an unwelcome spectator. My paternal grandmother, a vibrant woman in her 70s, took me aside during Christmas dinner. "You have your father's perseverance," she told me, her eyes crinkling with affection. "And his heart. But that spark, that fire when you talk about something you care about, that is all you." 3 years later, I graduated from high school as valedictorian. My father beamed with pride as I delivered my speech, while my mother sat a few rows behind him and his parents, looking on with a quiet, almost awkward respect. Our relationship had settled into something polite, if not close, built on a foundation of careful honesty rather than the false harmony she had once preferred. I moved to the East Coast for college, pursuing a degree in psychology with a minor in family law. The physical distance from both parents allowed me to further define myself, outside the context of their divorce and the drama of my adolescence. I discovered passions and strengths I might never have known if my life had continued on its previous trajectory. During my junior year, I interned with a nonprofit that advocates for children in divorce cases, using my own experiences to help others navigate similar challenges. This work ultimately became my career path, developing programs for family courts to better consider the needs of children during custody disputes. The journey to forgiveness was long and nonlinear. Some days, the memory of my mother's casual shrug as she walked away at the airport still had the power to take my breath away. On other days, I could look at her with a sense of compassion, acknowledging her humanity, her flaws, and her limited capacity, without bitterness. As my therapist had told me years before, forgiveness does not mean condoning what happened. It means not letting it have power over you anymore. On my 25th birthday, I sent my mother a letter, explaining my hard-won understanding that people can only give what they possess inside themselves. "Your capacity for unconditional love was damaged long before I came along," I wrote, "realizing that has freed me from expecting something from you that you are incapable of giving." Her reply was surprisingly self-aware. "You deserved a better mother than I was capable of being," she wrote back. "I am sorry for that every day." When I got married at 28, my father walked me down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. "From the moment you called me from that airport, all I wanted was to see you happy and whole," he whispered just before he gave my hand to my soon-to-be husband. "Look at you now." My mother attended the wedding with a new partner, Cashin having long since departed after their eventual divorce. She behaved with a quiet dignity, not trying to claim credit for the woman I had become, a restraint that spoke to her own slow, painful growth over the years. My mother taught me about the importance of self-reliance and the perils of chasing status over genuine connection. My father taught me about the patient resilience of true love and the courage to rebuild from loss. Together, their lessons formed the blueprint for the life I built and the family I started. The airport abandonment, the event that once defined me, slowly receded into just one chapter of a much longer story. A turning point, yes, but not the destination. In a strange and unexpected way, Being left behind was the very thing that propelled me forward, forcing me to find a strength I never knew I had. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my mother had taken me to Bali that day, if she had chosen me over Cashin's preference. Would I still be trapped in a cycle of seeking her conditional approval? Would I have ever discovered the depth of my father's unwavering love? Would I have ever truly found my own voice, my own purpose? These are, of course, questions without answers. What I do know is what my father taught me. That family is not defined by biology or legal papers, but by the consistent, daily choice to show up, to cherish, and to prioritize one another. And in her own way, through her absence, my mother taught me that too. If you have ever felt left behind or betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, please know that their failure is not a reflection of your worth. Family can be found, and it can be built in the most unexpected of places, as long as you remain open to connection, even in the face of heartbreak. Thank you for listening to my story. Be well and take care.